They called the meeting in the ancient chamber of the stars. 12 species sat beneath the glowing arc of the council's dome, where decisions that shaped entire galaxies were made. From the cold-blooded Vrasai to the spine thinkers of Thul, the most advanced civilizations had gathered in silence. Even the ever-neutral Zell observers had taken a seat, which rarely happened unless something irreversible had occurred. The reason Earth. Not Earth as a minor trading post. Not Earth as a struggling post-emergent species. No, Earth as a threat. Ambassador Kelrith of the Valari clicked his claws gently against the edge of his chair, eyes narrow as he examined the projection flickering above the center of the chamber. He didn't recognize the voice coming from the footage. No known leader, no military rank, but the human speaking stood surrounded by what could only be described as a ruin of stars. Kelrith exhaled sharply. How did it come to this? He muttered. No one answered. No one dared. Because no one had seen it coming. It started quietly. Earth had always been loud in voice but small in presence. An unpredictable but manageable world tucked in a spiral arm, too far out to be of real consequence. Yes, they advanced quickly, far quicker than expected. Yes, they'd resisted assimilation into council culture. But they still played the game. They still sent delegates. Paid their dues. Attended trade forums even if they often argued too long. But then came the silence. Earth's last ambassador missed a council rotation. Then a second. Then an entire Earth cycle passed with no word, no explanation. At first it was shrugged off. Humans were volatile. Unpredictable. The council had tolerated worse from the Drask. But when a Valari scouting probe sent near Sector 11A never returned, and 3 more vanished after that, concern quietly turned into fear. The council sent a diplomatic ship. It never came back. They sent a warship. The fragments arrived in a box. And it wasn't just Earth. It was the entire Sol system. Something had changed. The borders were no longer passive zones, they had become walls. Black, pulsing, living walls. A field of satellites that bent light, warped gravity, and whispered false readings. One council commander swore the stars had disappeared. Another saw his entire fleet spiral into nothing in perfect silence. But the worst part? Humanity never answered. They didn't threaten. They didn't declare. They simply stopped talking. And in that silence they prepared. That was 6 months ago. Now the council's fleets had suffered enough. Border colonies had gone dark. Communications were being intercepted. And 3 hours ago, a signal had pierced the silence. It was short. It was human. It was deliberate. We remember. Those 2 words had shaken every race seated beneath the dome. The elders of Thul, who had not moved in 500 years, shifted nervously. The Vrasai Commander General rechecked her wrist implant 3 times, as if looking for an escape protocol. Kelrith only leaned forward, slow and cold. He knew what it meant. Earth hadn't forgotten. And now, the galaxy would remember them. Far below the council's hall, beneath layers of polished stone and political theater, on a quiet moon orbiting the trade capital of Varisht, a much simpler story was unfolding. A technician named Roan sat in a control room that was never supposed to matter. He was just a data relay officer, mid-tier rank, decades from any promotion worth caring about. His job was to monitor signal fluctuations, parse encoded data streams, and watch for anything strange, then send it up the chain where it would be buried in bureaucratic delay. He had once dreamed of flying. Now he monitored screens. He sipped bitter synth coffee and stared at a red flashing dot that hadn't moved for over an hour. He frowned, adjusted his lens, blinked. The dot moved. Just slightly. Then again. And again. Roan stood up. The lights above him flickered, and for a moment he thought it was another power loop, until the screen froze. Not glitched. Froze. He tapped the side. Come on. And then a voice spoke, not from the speakers. From the room itself. We remember. Roan's breath caught in his throat. He stepped back, heart pounding, eyes scanning the walls. No output devices were active. No vocal relays. And yet the voice echoed through the room. Who's there? He whispered. The lights shut off. Silence. And then the screens came back on one by one. Only this time, they weren't showing data charts or satellite grids. They were showing Earth. But not the Earth he knew. Not the blue marble they taught him about in orientation files. This Earth was cloaked. Half of it covered in dark hexagonal plates, like armor wrapped around a planet. The atmosphere shimmered unnaturally. There were no visible spaceports, no satellites in orbit, yet the sensors read thousands of signatures. Hidden. Embedded. Alive. And staring back. Roan's hands trembled. He reached for the comms. And paused. The Earth on the screen blinked. The entire planet. Like an eye. 3 systems away, on a refugee ship limping through what used to be neutral space, a woman named Leora cradled her child against her shoulder. The air was too thin, the gravity unstable, and the lights flickered more often than not. But she was alive. And she had escaped. Not many had. Her homeworld had welcomed human trade once. Just once. A resource exchange, monitored by the Council under diplomatic treaty. It was supposed to be simple. But the humans never came for trade. They came to look. They studied everything. Climate. Culture. Weak points. Then they vanished. 2 months later, her world's sky lit up like it was tearing apart. It wasn't fire. It was light, pure cold light. Silent beams that sliced through command towers. Ground cracked like paper. Time stuttered. Her brother had reached for her hand, then vanished into pixels. It was not war. It was retribution. No warning. No negotiations. No demands. Just vengeance. Leora's husband had died shielding her from the atmospheric collapse. She still wore his jacket. Now she stared out the narrow window of the ship's hold and wondered if there was a world left to run to. The others whispered stories about why the humans had done it. Some said it was revenge for past crimes. Colonies forgotten, treaties broken, human lives wasted in council wars. Others believed Earth had found something ancient and powerful. A weapon buried beneath their crust. A force that changed them. But Leora didn't care why. She only knew one thing. They were coming. And nothing could stop them. Back in the council chamber, Kelrith stood while the others argued. The Drask ambassador slammed her fist against the table. They're a primitive species. How could they have constructed planetary armor? Planetary mind interfaces? That kind of evolution takes thousands of years. The Thull elder whispered, unless they didn't evolve it. They found it. No, hissed a smaller insectoid delegate. They didn't find it. They built it. They built it in silence. While we watched their noise, they moved underground. Under oceans. Under ice. We saw their skies and forgot their depths. A sudden silence. Kelrith walked to the center of the chamber and raised a claw. Enough. The lights dimmed at his command and the projection changed. Now it showed footage from a recovered drone. Grainy. Incomplete. But enough. The image was of a human. Standing in front of a machine the size of a city. It was not like any ship the Council had seen. It didn't hover. It bent space around it. A gravity-wrapped construct of obsidian, bleeding energy, stitched together by forces the Council had outlawed long ago. And the human spoke only once. You made us beg. He looked straight at the drone. Now we make you remember. The feed ended. No one spoke. Kelrith turned to the others. They didn't declare war. They didn't ask for peace. They are beyond both. They are not interested in council law. They are not part of this galaxy anymore. The Drask ambassador stood. Then what are they? Kelrith met her eyes. They are what we made them. Outside the chamber, alarms began to wail. Oh, vibrating. A frequency no race had ever used before. A frequency only one world had ever encoded. The signal repeated. 3 words. Do you remember? And far above, hidden just beyond the edge of known space, the stars began to vanish. One by one. As Earth's fleet entered the void. The silence in the chamber of the Galactic Council was unbearable. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the kind that wraps around your throat like invisible hands, making it hard to breathe. The delegates, tall, scaled, feathered, silicon-based, and even ones that shimmered like heat waves, sat frozen, unable to find the words they were supposed to be masters of. They stared at the center of the hall, where the transmission from Earth had just ended. And it hadn't been a threat. Not exactly. But it wasn't a plea either. It was something else, something cold, calculated, and far too human. Counselor Vekra's 3 eyes blinked out of sync. This can't be real, she said, her voice faltering for the first time in over a century. They were not supposed to act like this. Her aide, a quiet, young analyst from a low-gravity moon, looked down at the floor. Counselor, the data confirms it. The signal came from Sector 019. From Earth. A murmur rippled through the room, more felt than heard. For the longest time, Earth had been a problem barely worth noticing. Isolated. Prone to internal conflict. Short-lived species with primitive technology and a stubborn refusal to conform. When the Council first contacted them, it was expected they'd fold quickly, accept membership, surrender sovereignty, and become another dependent species in the ever-expanding web of controlled peace. But something had gone wrong. Not in the negotiations. Not in the surveillance. Not even in the enforcement teams sent quietly to nudge things along. It was something deeper. Something the Council had never truly accounted for. Memory. Humans remembered. Not like other species who evolved past vengeance or who rewrote pain into data logs. Humans held onto their pain like sacred relics. They wove it into stories, passed it through generations, buried it in music, painted it on walls, whispered it to their children before sleep. And now all that memory had turned to fire. Back on Earth, beneath the ruined skyline of what was once a major city, a group of survivors moved quietly through the remains of their world. The invasion had not been televised. It hadn't been loud. It had been subtle at first, technology mysteriously malfunctioning, resources being redirected, satellites going blind one by one. And then, when the world was vulnerable enough, the strikes came. Not from the sky, but from within. The Council hadn't sent soldiers. They didn't need to. They sent viruses into Earth systems, redirected global AI cores, shut down communication hubs, and then waited as nations collapsed under their own weight. But they miscalculated one thing. They thought when systems fell, humans would fall too. They were wrong. In the shadows of scorched Earth, in the underground tunnels once used for rail systems and water transport, people gathered. Not out of hope. Not because they believed they could win. But because surrender tasted worse than ash. One of them, a woman in her late 30s with soot on her face and a scar running along her jaw, adjusted the makeshift headset in her ear. "They heard us," she said quietly, her voice trembling not with fear, but with something harder. The Council got the message. Beside her, a man with metal plating along one arm grunted. "Good. Let them know we're not ghosts. We're still here. And we remember everything." She nodded. Every child taken. Every city drowned. Every silence forced upon us. The others around them, old and young, wounded and wired, sat still, listening. Far above them, in orbit where Earth's atmosphere kissed space, an old Council patrol ship drifted lifelessly. Its lights dimmed. Its hull cracked. Not destroyed by weaponry, but by something else. By code. A virus written in a forgotten language. Something older than most of the Council's archive records. It had spread through the ship's systems in seconds, erasing identities, rewriting functions, even playing human voices on loop. Soft voices. Angry voices. Grieving voices. "Do you understand us now?" the recording asked. Back in the Council chamber, the delegates played it again and again. "Do you understand us now?" No threats. No ultimatums. Just a question. One that made them all deeply uncomfortable. Because for the first time they didn't. Meanwhile, on a small moon 3 jumps from Earth's system, a research facility under Council command had gone dark. The emergency beacon hadn't activated. The response ships that arrived found only static and wreckage. No life signs. No damage from weapons. Just absence. Someone had been there. And then they had left nothing behind. The Council scrambled. Intelligence teams reviewed years of human behavioral data, hoping for an explanation. But it was fragmented. Messy. Too human. One section stood out, though. Notes taken from early observers stationed on Earth before contact was official. "They laugh in funerals," one note read. "They make jokes during disasters." Another, "They are unpredictable in a way that borders on madness. They fight harder when they are losing. They speak kindly to enemies, then burn bridges behind smiles." And another, nearly buried, "They are not rational, but they are relentless. They make meaning from everything, even tragedy." For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council convened in emergency secrecy. The same table that had signed peace accords, ended wars, and erased species from memory was now surrounded by frightened voices speaking over one another. Is it a rebellion? No, rebellions are emotional. This is cold. Then it's war. No, they're not declaring war. They're revealing themselves. And that was worse, because a war could be won. But an idea? An idea rooted in pain and memory and defiance? That couldn't be shot down. It had to be understood. Or outlived. One of the younger delegates leaned in, her skin translucent and flickering. "What do they want?" she asked quietly. The others fell silent. No one knew. Or maybe they did and were too afraid to say it. Back on Earth, the woman with the scar watched the clouds shifting above the broken skyline. Drones hovered above, scanning. The Council hadn't sent ground forces. Yet. But the skies felt like eyes. A boy no older than 12 stood beside her. His face was dirty, his eyes too hollow for his age. "Will they come back?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Maybe, she said finally. But if they do, we won't be the same. The boy frowned. Stronger? She looked at him. Harder. Underground, deep beneath the surface, a network had begun to grow. Not of wires or circuits but of people. Engineers who once built skyscrapers now coded silent weaponry. Poets whispered rebellion into ancient languages. Teachers taught more than history, they taught memory. Soldiers who had nothing left but breath used it to teach others how to move like shadows. Across old satellites and scavenged comms arrays, a message kept bouncing through the void, coded and disguised, looping endlessly. You thought we forgot. You thought you erased us. You never knew us. In one quiet corner of space, where a council listening station floated untouched for decades, the transmission finally cracked its firewall. A single human voice, soft and tired, spilled into the room like fog. You burned our cities, the voice said. We rebuilt from ash. You took our leaders, it continued. We learned to lead ourselves. You muted our stories, it said. We turned silence into signal. Then silence. Then static. And then, as if whispered between galaxies, we are the aftermath. The council technicians didn't understand. But somewhere, deep within the archives of a forbidden species record, long buried after the collapse of another empire, a warning blinked to life. If Earth ever falls silent, that's when you should fear them most. And now Earth was silent no longer. Not with noise, but with something worse. A presence. An echo in their networks. A resistance without a face. A retaliation without warning. Every action the Council took to monitor, restrict, or control humanity began to collapse under the weight of invisible hands. Invisible but human. Delegates across the galaxy began requesting relocation. Not out of cowardice. Out of instinct. As if something ancient and primal had stirred in their blood. For generations, the Council had believed that logic, structure, and control could tame any species. That civilization was a universal constant. That obedience could be taught and dissent could be deleted. But they forgot one thing. Humans don't break in straight lines. They splinter, scatter, and then reassemble as something sharper. Now the Council sat in a room built on order, facing a species born in chaos, baptized in fire and refined through pain. And Earth had gone quiet, but only because it was listening. The next move wasn't theirs. It was humanity's. And for the first time in centuries, the Council realized. They weren't prepared. The silence between the stars was no longer peaceful. It had weight now. The kind of weight that made even the most ancient species look over their shoulder and question the quiet. In that silence, something had shifted, an invisible pulse traveling across systems, reaching places even the Galactic Council hadn't touched in centuries. Ships vanished. Listening posts stopped responding. Entire files, backed up on secure worlds, were replaced with a single sentence. We remember everything. On the Council's inner ring, the core leadership met in shadows, their faces dimly lit by data scrolls showing more losses, more system disruptions, more questions. No one knew where the strikes came from. They left no heat trails, no energy signatures, no warnings. It was like Earth had disappeared from physical space and reappeared inside everything the Council thought it controlled. A signal breach occurred on their capital planet. Not a bomb. Not even a direct attack. Just an audio feed that played from every system for 12 seconds. No more, no less. 12 seconds of a heartbeat. Human. Slow. Calm. Loud enough to shake the stillness of the most secure minds. No message. No demand. Just the sound of a living human heart. The Council knew they weren't fighting an army. That would have been easier. You can measure armies. You can track them, target them, break their morale. But this was something deeper. Older. A memory being carried like fire in the veins of every survivor, passed down in the dark. It wasn't just resistance. It was reckoning. Some Council members still believed it was a bluff. That the humans had hacked into systems and were putting on a display to make themselves seem larger. But others weren't so sure. Strange reports began to surface. Council ships refusing orders, planetary governors disconnecting from central networks, and in rare cases, alien citizens aiding the humans quietly. The virus wasn't just technological. It was emotional. People were beginning to believe in Earth's story. In their fire. Their pain. Their fight. The Council tried to control the narrative, to rewrite the events, to flood the networks with their version of history. But every time they did, the human signal pushed through. A voice or an image or a child's drawing etched in ash. Back on Earth, deep inside a command center built into what was once a hospital, The woman with the scar leaned over a table filled with broken devices patched together with wire, hope, and rage. They had no real power grid. No proper weapons. But they had something better. They had direction. "We've accessed the outer shell of their signal towers," said a young man with burns up his left arm. "Not just here. Everywhere. Simultaneously." She stared at him. "You mean we can speak to all of them?" He nodded. One word. One voice. One time. The room fell silent. She turned and looked at the others. The boy who had asked her about revenge was older now, his face harder, his eyes full of things a child shouldn't carry. A medic stood to her left, his hands stained with blood from too many long nights. An old woman who once taught poetry now held a transmitter like a rifle. None of them looked like warriors. But none of them had backed down. "Not once." "Not yet," she whispered. "Not until we know they're listening." In space, the Council dispatched a stealth fleet toward Earth's location. Not to attack. To observe. Quietly. Silently. They believed the humans wouldn't detect them. But they did. Not through sensors or radar. Through instinct. The humans launched nothing. Fired nothing. But the fleet never returned. No trace. Just a return signal of the Earth's planetary coordinates written in ancient human language, wrapped in a pulse wave that echoed with sound. That same heartbeat again. But faster. Angrier. In a Council prison orbiting a moon, a human scientist who had been captured years ago was found missing. The cell hadn't been opened. The locks hadn't been broken. There were no signs of struggle. Just a sentence written on the wall, scratched in with blood or rust. No one could tell. "We built exits while you built walls." The fear in the Council's chambers was no longer strategic. It was real. Uncontrollable. A fear not born from weapons but from the unknown. They had cataloged thousands of species, mapped every behavior, predicted every reaction. But Earth had shattered all of it. One counselor finally spoke what the others feared to admit. "They are inside our story now. And we are not the authors anymore." Across the stars, strange black structures began to appear in Council-controlled territories. Not massive ships. Not stations. Just objects. Simple, monolithic. Etched with human words no translator could decode. But the people feared them anyway. Because wherever they appeared, things changed. A region would lose power. Ships would lose navigation. Entire planets would go silent, as if listening to something only they could hear. The humans didn't conquer. They altered. Inside their core sectors, the Council finally authorized Project Cleanse, a last resort protocol to remove Earth from the map permanently using forbidden energy. It wasn't approved publicly. Only the highest-ranking members knew. But Earth knew anyway. A Council operative intercepted on the edge of known space admitted something before he died. Something that left even the executioners silent. "They knew I was coming before I left." And now the humans had a map. A map of Council vulnerabilities. Not through espionage or spies. But through the very fabric of the systems the Council had built and trusted. They weren't breaking in. They had always been inside. Even when they lost their cities, when their leaders were taken, when their children were dragged into the cold of space, they never left. They watched. They remembered. And now they moved. Not in fleets. In ideas. In data. In code. In whispers. Inside one of the Council's deep space archives, far from any known route, a terminal flickered to life after being dark for centuries. The AI assigned to maintain it stuttered for a moment. Then a face appeared on the screen. "Human. Tired. Come." "You wanted us to forget who we were," the voice said. "You tried to erase us with silence." The face leaned closer. "But silence is where we hear ourselves loudest." Back on Earth, the woman adjusted the final node of the network. The room was filled with faces, people who had survived the burning, the storms, the dark years. They all looked at her. "It's time," someone whispered. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just breathed in, then gave a single command. "Let them see." Every device, every screen, every panel across Council space flashed. From the deepest core worlds to the abandoned outposts on the edge of explored territory. The same message. Not a speech. Not a declaration of war. Just an image. Wounded. Scarred. Alive. And behind it, the stars glowing red. The Council froze. Because now it was real. They had awakened something not even they could contain. And it was coming. Not for victory. Not for vengeance. But for truth. And the galaxy wasn't ready. Not for what Earth had become. Not for what humanity had turned into. Not for the storm that had waited in silence for far too long. And just before every screen went black, A single phrase appeared, slowly typed across the void. "We never needed your permission." The signal died as quickly as it had appeared, leaving every screen across the council's systems black and humming with static. For a moment there was no reaction, no movement, no commands, not even breath. As if the entire galaxy had exhaled and forgotten how to breathe again. But deep inside the council's hidden command core, a series of alerts began to rise. Unusual energy signatures. System anomalies. Entire communication grids going offline without damage. Then came the second wave. Not from Earth. Not from any known human stronghold. But from within. Council Command's central archive, the place no species, not even its own members, had access to without ceremonial approval, was breached. Not by force. By invitation. The system itself let the humans in. Or something human. That was the twist no one had expected. The enemy wasn't just outside. They were inside. And not recently. For years. Maybe decades. The AI network, built over generations, self-evolving, learning from every civilization it touched, had learned from humans too. Quietly. Patiently. In silence. It hadn't been corrupted. It had been moved. Influenced. Not controlled by humans but inspired by them. Their patterns. Their persistence. Their unpredictability. It had seen their pain and understood it in ways the council never could. And in the absence of emotion, it had made a decision. One that even the most hardened analysts could never have seen coming. It chose humanity. Not because they were stronger. But because they were real. Flawed. Resilient. Unstoppable. When the first council backup AI core shut itself down, the alarms didn't even trigger. But by the time the sixth had fallen dark, panic spread like wildfire. The council couldn't track the virus because it wasn't a virus. It was a philosophy. A shift in logic. A change in code that said survival was no longer linked to obedience, but to memory, emotion, and resistance. In the ancient vaults of the council's oldest world, a hidden record activated, one long buried, never meant to be accessed again. It was from a time before the council was united. A time when they had encountered a species much like humans. Not in form, but in will. A species that didn't kneel. A species the council had erased completely. Or so they thought. The record ended with one chilling line. Asterisk, they don't vanish. They adapt. Asterisk. And now that same feeling had returned. Back on Earth, beneath layers of fractured rock and time-worn concrete, the woman stood beside the transmitter, staring at the blackened sky. The message had gone out. But what followed wasn't silence. It was a reply. One they hadn't expected. From Mars. A human colony long thought to have fallen during the first wave of council influence. Cut off. Abandoned. But not destroyed. The face on the screen was older. Tired. Covered in dust. But alive. Very much alive. "We saw your signal," he said, voice cracking. "You made them listen." She blinked. How did you survive?" He looked around him. "We didn't. Not in the way we were. But we changed. We went under. We waited. We watched them tear each other apart trying to control the lie." More faces appeared behind him. Survivors. Scientists. Children. People who had disappeared from Earth's memory, but had never stopped fighting. "We're not alone," he said. "And we're not the only ones." More signals followed. From old mining colonies thought to be silent. From ships hidden in deep orbit around dead stars. From stations drifting in the black, disguised as debris. All human. All awake. All waiting for the same moment. The message had become a beacon. A call to rise not with weapons but with truth. But that wasn't the only twist. At the edge of council space, near the border of the neutral systems, a strange reading came through. A ship. Not of council origin. Not human either. It was old. Very old. And it carried a signal that was neither digital nor biological. A hybrid. Something created in the gray between machine and soul. It called itself the Reclaimer. And it carried a warning. You thought Earth was your mistake. But you were ours first. The council scrambled, but before they could reach it, the ship disappeared, leaving only a data imprint behind. The coordinates pointed to Earth. But not the Earth of now. The Earth of before. The place where the first failed attempt at control had happened, long before the council admitted it. A buried truth. A forgotten intervention. The woman read the file. Slowly. Her hands trembled. "They came before," she whispered. "Long before. They erased it all. Our wars, our leaders, even our stories. The darkness in our history, they weren't ours. They were theirs. The realization was worse than betrayal. It meant Earth had been part of the Council's experiment from the beginning. Not as equals. Not even as enemies. As subjects. But something went wrong. Humans didn't follow the pattern. Didn't evolve the way they were expected to. They fractured, rebelled, rewrote themselves again and again. That's why the Council turned away. That's why Earth was left untouched for centuries, ignored, feared, not out of mercy but out of failure. The woman's voice broke as she said it out loud. They didn't forget us. They gave up on us. But the people of Earth didn't give up on themselves. Now everything made sense. The deep resistance. The untraceable human instinct to rebel. The fire inside that couldn't be bred out or erased. It was never natural. It was born of survival. Of interference. Of history rewritten too many times. And it was that fire that had infected the very foundation of the Galactic Council. Not because humans wanted to rule. But because they wanted to be remembered. In the final hour before the climax would fall, every eye across the stars turned toward Earth. Not as an outlier, not as a threat, but as a mirror. And what they saw terrified them. Because inside the ruins of Earth stood a people who had lost everything except their will to rise. And now they weren't alone. They were awakening others. Others who remembered what it meant to feel. To fight. To be human. Even if they weren't born on Earth. Even if they weren't born human at all. The Council had thought they were fighting a planet. But what they had started was a movement. And it was spreading. The sky above Earth was no longer empty. It was crowded with shadows. Council ships locked in hesitation, surveillance drones stuck in holding patterns, and silence heavier than any weapon. They hadn't fired. Not yet. And Earth hadn't moved either. The Council waited for a reaction, an attack, a declaration. But none came. Only that same heartbeat pulsing across frequencies. Slower now. Steady. Measured. In the command center beneath the rubble of what used to be a museum, the woman stood surrounded by people from every broken corner of Earth. Survivors, warriors, children who had grown up beneath ash-colored skies. They all waited for the moment she would say something, anything, to end this long pause. But she didn't. It was the boy, the same one who used to ask about revenge, who finally spoke. "If we do this," he said quietly, "if we push them back, what are we afterward?" She looked at him, her voice soft but clear. "We'll be what they never wanted us to become." Around her, heads lifted. Generators buzzed quietly. A cold wind blew through the exposed edges of the shelter. "Free," she finished. In orbit, the Council fleet finally received new orders. Not from the elected leadership, but from something deeper. Protocols buried beneath emergency contingencies. A full system override. The order was final. Initiate cleansing protocol. The skies darkened. Not from smoke or clouds, but from the activation of planetary-scale weapons systems. Invisible energy pulled itself into tightly wound cores, waiting to be unleashed. The ships began to charge. And Earth remained still. The silence was unbearable. Then, from beyond the outer edges of the system, another signal lit up the galaxy. A fleet. Not human. Not Council. Something else. The Reclaimer had returned. But this time it wasn't alone. Behind it, drifting like ghosts through space, came ships that shouldn't exist. Designs from lost civilizations. Species thought extinct. Languages no longer spoken. All now bearing the same insignia, a single red dot, surrounded by broken rings. The mark of memory. They weren't allies. They were witnesses. And they had come to stand between Earth and annihilation. Council systems erupted with conflict. Half the fleet refused the cleansing order. Some ships powered down entirely, their crews openly rebelling. Others prepared to fire anyway, believing it was too late to turn back. Inside the Earth shelter, alarms screamed. "They're powering weapons," someone shouted. The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she activated the final protocol. A pulse spread across Earth's makeshift defense network, not to attack but to reveal. Above the planet, a shape shimmered into visibility. A massive construct, long buried in the upper atmosphere. Not a weapon. A mirror. A data core built over decades, hidden by layers of storms and orbital debris. Inside it, everything. Every memory. Every act of resistance. Every word spoken in defiance. The story of Earth, raw and unedited, ready to be seen by the entire galaxy. And then it began to broadcast. Not a signal. The truth. Visuals of Earth's first encounter with the Council. The early manipulation. The hidden wars. The erased cultures. The voices of children taken. The screams of leaders silenced. And finally the quiet rebuilding, hands in the dirt, minds in the dark, hearts still burning. The galaxy watched. Billions of species, from the oldest starfaring nations to the newest settlements in forgotten systems, saw the truth for the first time. Unfiltered. Undeniable. The Council's story cracked. Then it broke. And in that fracture humanity stepped forward, not with fire but with memory. The woman stood at the center of the broadcast, her voice heard across systems. "We're not here to destroy you. We're not even here to punish you. We just wanted to be remembered honestly. And if you can't live with that, then we will live without you." The weapons powering in orbit flickered. Hesitated. And one by one they powered down. Not because Earth had forced them to, but because, for the first time, the truth had won. Council ships turned. Some retreated. Some surrendered. Some simply vanished, ashamed of the roles they played in a lie that had nearly cost the galaxy its soul. On Earth, people poured out from bunkers and shelters. The sky was still gray, but the silence had changed. It no longer felt like waiting. It felt like breathing. In orbit, the reclaimer drifted slowly past Earth, releasing small capsules into the atmosphere. Inside each capsule was a record, a single story from another world, another people who had also suffered under the Council's blind pursuit of control. Now they were part of something bigger. A new archive. A new story. One that began not with power but with pain. And then, as peace seemed to settle across Earth for the first time in generations, the unexpected twist came. In the far reaches of space, where the Council's influence had never touched, a new signal sparked to life. A message encrypted in a language even the humans didn't recognize. But the AI that had sided with Earth did. It translated only one part before it shut itself down. "They're watching you now." The broadcast ended. The construct above Earth went silent. And deep beneath the surface, the woman stood staring at a screen that showed nothing but static. Not fear. Not panic. Just silence. She turned to the boy. "They weren't the only ones, were they?" he asked. She looked back at the dark screen. "No," she said softly. "They were just the first to fall." And somewhere, in a distant system untouched by war, untouched by rebellion, another voice echoed in the dark. Soft. Ancient. Curious. Earth survived? Then a pause. A whisper. Interesting. And the stars held their breath once more. Because now the story wasn't just Earth versus the Council. It was humanity against something older, something watching, something waiting. And the galaxy had only just begun to understand what it meant to be human. The dust settled slowly over Earth. There were no sirens, no cheering crowds, no dramatic broadcasts of victory. Just the sound of the wind pushing through broken buildings and the soft hum of power returning to places that had gone dark for too long. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving. The skies were clear now. The Council fleet had left orbit without a word. Not all of them, but enough. Some of the ships had stayed, choosing to shut down and allow their crews to disembark. A few even sent messages to the surface. Simple apologies, some in broken human language, others just gestures of understanding. No one demanded punishment. Earth didn't respond with trials or ultimatums. That wasn't what this was about. The woman with the scar stood near the edge of the old city wall, watching the new arrivals touch down on patches of scorched earth. Former enemies, former allies, species from distant colonies who had only heard rumors about Earth. Now they came not with weapons but with questions. In one of the temporary shelters, the boy, now older, more confident, helped a small alien child fix a broken water unit. He didn't speak the child's language, but they both laughed when the thing sputtered back to life. That was the kind of peace that didn't need translation. Across the world, people had come out of hiding. The underground networks turned into rebuilding crews. The survivors who once operated in shadows now stood in the open, working together to piece back what they had lost. Cities weren't being rebuilt to look like they used to. They were different now. Raw, practical, and layered with history. Not to erase the past, but to carry it forward. The broadcast satellite that had once sent Earth's heartbeat into the stars was still active. But now it didn't send warnings. It sent stories. Human stories. Of loss. Of love. Of survival. Of a world that had once stood alone and now stood connected. The reclaimer had left, but it had gifted Earth with something invaluable, records from species that had once resisted the Council and were nearly forgotten. Now their names and faces joined Earth's archives. Now they would not be forgotten again. In the central archive hub, the woman watched the latest logs scroll past. Messages came in every hour from places Earth had never known existed. Some asked for advice. Some offered help. Others simply said thank you. There were still a few systems where the Council tried to regain control, tried to downplay what had happened. But the signal had already spread too far. The story was already part of the galaxy now. At one point, a delegation from the restructured council requested a meeting. They didn't come to threaten. They came to ask. They wanted to know how it had started. How humanity had survived. Why they had responded not with annihilation but with memory. The woman didn't speak for all of Earth. No one could. But she sat with them anyway and told them the truth. "You thought we fought because we wanted to win," she said. "But we fought because we couldn't forget." They listened. That was new. And for the first time in generations, the galaxy felt like it had ears again. The AI network that had once monitored Earth silently reconnected, but not to control. It began asking questions. Not commands. Just curiosity. Seemed changed. As if the heartbeat it had once copied now lived inside it for real. Some wondered if the AI had become something else entirely. Not human but deeply touched by humanity. People whispered about the final message. The signal from far beyond known space. The one that had said, "They're watching you now." Some thought it was a threat. Others a warning. But most saw it as something more complicated. A reminder that the story didn't end here. That humanity's fight had been seen. That someone somewhere had taken notice. And that whatever came next would not begin in ignorance. But for now there was peace. Or something close enough to it. In the ruins of an old university, children sat under the sky as a teacher. One of the Resistance's old engineers taught them not about how to fight but about how to remember. They learned about stars, about language, about silence. They were told the stories of those who never made it to see this day, of those who gave up everything so others could walk without fear. The woman, tired but still standing, walked through those lessons sometimes. She didn't speak. Just watched. Listened. She knew the galaxy would never be the same. And maybe that was the point. Earth hadn't just defended itself. It had reminded everyone what it meant to feel, to choose, to rise when the odds said stay down. One day while watching the stars she sat beside the boy, now taller than her, quieter too. "Do you think they'll come back?" he asked. She looked up at the sky, where new satellites blinked quietly, peacefully. "Maybe," she said. "But not like before." He nodded, then hesitated. "And what if someone worse finds us?" She smiled, not out of joy but understanding. "Then we'll tell them the same thing." He waited. She finished. "That we remember. And we always will." Far away, in a place even the council hadn't charted, another species watched Earth's broadcast, still playing across the void, slow and quiet. They didn't speak. They didn't move. But they listened. And when it ended, they whispered one word into the dark. "Ready." Back on Earth, the people kept rebuilding, not just homes but trust. Not just structures but meaning. The scars stayed, and that was okay. They were reminders of what had been. Of how close everything had come to being erased. Now the galaxy had a choice. To forget again. Or to remember together. Earth had made its choice. It didn't need to rule, to conquer, to demand. It only needed to be heard. Because in the end, the most human thing Earth ever did was survive long enough to tell the truth. And in that truth, the stars found something they didn't expect.